I would now like to invite Dr. Andreas Mundel, who's actually done many hats. He's been a part of various strategic roles in consulting and logistics industry for 20 years. After studying physics, he initially worked for McKinsey and then moved to Deutsche Post DHL in 2004 as head of strategy of DHL Express Europe. He's now SVP of Group Strategy and responsible for strategic projects in production. This includes the Clean OPS team, the lead of the Sustainable Fuel Project, the Center of Excellence, automation of operations, the Group OHS team, and corporate patent management. He also coordinates the agenda of the operations board, which includes the divisional board members for operations in addition to the CEO. Dr. Mundel, I will now hand over the floor to you. My many thanks for your patience for since joining in. You've been very patient with us. So thank you. Floor is yours now.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me and you can see my screen.
Yes, both are.
Good. Yeah, thank you for the invitation and sharing a little bit the perspective of a user of SAF, or I heard it in one of the former presentations of the industry. So we are DHL, and let me give first a short introduction into DHL. What are we doing? Why is SAF so important to us? And then a little bit on our journey while using SAF, and with a particularly a view on the trust that is needed in these processes. And there it comes all to the certificates that we just heard about. So when it comes to DHL Group, we are the world's largest logistics group with 600,000 employees and literally operating in any country of the world. But I want to focus on the green box on the right-hand side. We have set ourselves a very ambitious CO2 reduction target. We today have 34 million tons of emissions, and there were some questions, scope 1, scope 3. This is including scope 3, which for us is only subcontractors. We are in the lucky position of a service industry. We don't have any scope 3 downstream. We only have upstream scope 3. So we fully tackle scope 1 and scope 3 in our reduction, and we set ourselves a science-based target to reduce to 29 million tons by 2030. What this means, you need to think of what type of businesses are we actually doing, because ultimately we do touch quite a lot of the so-called hard to abate sectors. On the left-hand side, you can see that we do the international express business, so shipments that are shipped around the globe with 1 day delivery time. That is dependent on a very extensive air network that we operate, actually 300 dedicated aircrafts and a similar capacity that we do subcontract. Then we have the global forwarding and freight industry. This is air, road, and ocean freight, packaged goods, all outsourced in terms of business. But again, a huge part here is again the aviation emissions. And then we also operate warehouses and dedicated distribution in our supply chain division, e-commerce solutions, very specific international transport into countries and distribution, as well as here in Germany, the legacy postal business, post and parcel. The latter ones predominantly have emissions in the road space. And only the 2 divisions on the left are actually in the aviation part. But as I said, 32 million tons as of today. 2/3 is actually aviation, because that is the most intense sector that we do operate. The second biggest lever would be road fuels. Having said this, it is clear that aviation, reducing aviation emissions, and then you ultimately talk about SAF, is our biggest lever to decarbonize. It is actually addressing 2/3 of our footprint. Very short recap, how important is decarbonization to us? We just launched less than a year ago our new strategy. And one very important framework in our strategy is called bottom lines. So what are the key considerations when we make business decisions? And we had 3 bottom lines before: employer of choice, provider of choice, and investment of choice. The 3 things that we always balance when we take decisions. We have now on an equal level added here the green logistics of choice. So with every business decision we are doing, we are also assessing what is actually the impact on our footprint and other sustainable criteria, but CO2 footprint is the dominant topic. Packaging would, for example, be another one. So, and now looking at SAF, we use SAF meanwhile for more than 4 years. We are one of the largest off-takers of SAF that is produced today. Last year, we had an offtake of 73 kilotons, and that represented a share of 3.5% in our own operation. So that is already above any EU blending mandate. You see below where we source it from, predominantly currently still the usual suspects. But we also have negotiations with, I would say, newcomers on the market, new technology pathways, new production facilities where we are negotiating long-term offtake agreement, typically 10-year plus. And let me take this opportunity to address a few points that were discussed before. So what we currently source is all HEFA. Waste-based HEFA, it's all certified, by the way, simply because that is more or less the only SAF that is available at scale. We had already discussions about alcohol-to-jet projects. Also, the mentioned companies are known to us. It turns out that alcohol-to-jet has also a big concern with respect to feedstocks. When it comes to soybean oil or sugarcane, you do have the discussion of indirect land use change. We found it difficult to find fuels with the appropriate CO2 reduction per carbon intensity. We also look only at fuels with reduction higher than 60%. That turned out in the first deals for alcohol-to-jet that we discussed difficult. In general, we are open to this technology. We are still looking into some of those deals, but as long as the accountability and the indirect land use change and the factors is not 100% clarified, it's difficult for us. PTL was mentioned. We carefully look also into PTL deals. We recognize that they are still significantly more expensive than HEFA is, which makes it very difficult for us. And as you have listened to all the discussions before, also everybody expects that PTL is only at the beginning and cost will come down, which is more or less already a prohibitive argument for a company to make a long-term investment into an early PTL plant, which is obviously then one of the most important PTL plants mankind will ever build. Nonetheless, we understand that there is a mandate here in Europe to use already PTL partly in 2030. We are not really the obliged party as we are an airline. Only at one of our airports we are actually, therefore we are also looking into PTL options at the moment. The questions, how realistic is the PTL supply 2050 somewhere? I don't dare to answer anything that is as far out, but at least it's very difficult to meet the very small percentage in 2030 due to the ramp-up issues in the industry for the PTL. What was discussed briefly, the new pathways that starts from cellulosic waste, woody residues. We have big hope into those processes, despite the fact that it is not fully certified yet or eligible for air fuel. And we haven't seen the larger plants coming, but we do hope that this, with existing technology or existing technology components, can bring down cost for SAF significantly. And we are very much looking forward for the first plants there. This is a little bit the overview of where we do source SAF and our perspective on the market, having talked to the producers for 4 years by now. So Here you see a little bit where we are actually fueling SAF, because we try to distribute the SAF equal to our demands. 14 airports we meanwhile cover. You see, we also indicated where we got incentives for the fuel. The majority of the airports is covered by incentive, because indeed incentives are a very important part. It was mentioned before, HEFA roughly 3 times as expensive as Jet A. We typically expect that half of that gap can be covered by incentives. So that price was before incentives. So ideally, you can cover half of the gap by incentives. The remaining gap then is additional cost, is premium that we actually pay for the SAF, and that's premium that we forward to our customers, because we do commercialize the CO2 reductions we achieve with our SAF usage. We do offer green or carbon reduced air transport for our customers, our so-called Go Green Plus product, where we do validate vis-a-vis our customers the CO2 reduction, and they can benefit from this one, but they also have to pay for the premium that is required to buy the SAF. You see that we also managed to get the first airports in Asia, with in Singapore and in Japan, both airports without incentives, but for very special reasons also attractive to us. This is the landscape as we have it today. Before I come to the certification, where I also want to spend a little bit on it, or more on the trust issue of the entire industry, I want to introduce a framework that is called book and claim. And I think you all know, but I just want to re-emphasize why it is important. And in particular, I want to talk about the right-hand side of this picture, which is in many book and claim discussions forgotten. The left-hand side explains that book and claim, meaning the system where you separate the physical distribution of the fuel and the handling of the CO2 reduction separately. This is important when you want to distribute SAF to the airports, because SAF is not produced everywhere. It's only produced in some very limited locations. You can only achieve the connectivity to some airports. It makes it significantly easier if you do not need to distribute SAF physically everywhere, but you have a certain flexibility mechanism or book and claim mechanism behind it. That is typically understood and very widespread discussed in how to ease the SAF distribution with book and claim. What is in those discussions typically forgotten is that also we, as an airline and the user of SAF, we want to allocate the CO2 reduction to our customers. So even in a case that he doesn't fly from any of the 14 airports I have just shown before, but from any other airport, we want to be in a position to allocate the CO2 reduction to our customers. And this mechanism is the exact same book and claim mechanism that you would use on the left-hand side. So book and claim is absolutely important in order to distribute the CO2 savings that you achieve amongst the value chain and give it from one player to the other. And when you do this and you separate the physical flow and the CO2 reduction, then this famous word trust comes into game. So who guarantees that you do this correctly and that you do this with the right CO2 reduction and that everything is working as you would expect it? And this is essentially where the standards and where the certification comes into game. On the right-hand side, we discussed already, and it was nicely shown in the presentation before, on the SAF production side, SAF is by and large certified by 2 certification bodies, the ISCC and the RSB. RSB we have just seen. And that is indeed one of the requirements in our internal fuel policy, that all SAF that we buy and we accept needs to be certified by any of the standards of ISSC and RSB. We then internally do attribute those CO2 reductions that we achieve with the SAF to individual products / customers. And so that everybody trusts us. We also have an auditing of this process. That is currently the auditor STS, who is auditing the correctness of the certificates that we hand over to our customers. And the customers do trust those certificates because they need to adhere to international standards. They are not allowed to account for any type of CO2 reduction that is written on any type of paper. No, they also need to demonstrate very carefully to their auditors typically that they have procured proper CO2 reduced logistic services from us. And we then need to demonstrate that we have procured proper CO2 reduced SAF from our producers. And on the next slide, you see, and this is what shows a little bit the entire value chain. And we are just saying, don't forget the end of the value chain here on the right-hand side. If you talk about certification, and if you want to create any type of registries that track certification and that is following up on this, think through that you need to have this traceability and the trust throughout the entire value chain, from the point of origin to any production step that is necessary in SAF, also in the storage, the transportation and the blending of the SAF, in the fueling of the SAF into the aircraft. But it doesn't end there. It continues. We also need to think through on how do we properly demonstrate to our customers actually the CO2 reduction that was behind it. So from our perspective, the entire value chain and the certification process and appropriate registries should cover the entire chain that you see above. And this is what we are working on. We are testing this. RSB, I think was also mentioned, has a registry. We are working with them. ISCC uses registries. There are other registries out there where we try to find the right ingredients and the right players that help us to demonstrate the trust into the CO2 emissions of the SAF to our customers, because that is absolutely vital in order to commercialize the CO2 reduction and absolutely vital for us to collect money to pay the premium of sustainable aviation fuels. And maybe to conclude at the very end, so what is important now from a commercial use of SAF? We had heard many technical details of the processes. The left-hand side, a proper supply chain due diligence, and before we have heard already, that is absolutely vital that it comes here. A constructive dialogue with all players on what are actually the criteria that are lay behind the certification process. I don't know who has seen this in one of the RSB slides. Actually, RSB certifies against various standards for SAF, which is for us as a global airline a very annoying observation that actually many players in the industry define SAF differently or certified SAF differently, which makes it very difficult for us to operate globally. Third important element is that book and claim mechanism and the acceptance of book and claim, which is predominantly questions on whether the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the Science Based Target Initiative accepts the book and claim, so that this mechanism is fully accepted then also by the auditors. And last but not least, a very important part would be the fraud-proof registries, so that all the certificates are tracked properly and all the properties of the SAF is properly documented in a registry. That is what we hear from our customers would boost the trust in the entire industry again. So this is what we see as a SAF user, but as somebody who's also able to commercialize SAF, and we hear from our customers what is important so that they pay money for SAF, that they trust into SAF, and we can then use that to accelerate the ramp up of the production. So that's it from the DHL side, and I think I'm a little bit ahead of time, so if there are any immediate questions, happy to answer. Otherwise, I will type them in the chat.